I have seen a lot in my 42 years on the bench. I have watched people lie to my face, cry crocodile tears, and try every trick in the book to convince me that their time was more valuable than my courtroom. I have had CEOs check their watches. I have had attorneys tap their feet. I have had defendants sigh audibly while victims testified. But I have never, in all my decades wearing this robe, had a man interrupt me mid-sentence, hold up his hand, and tell me that every minute he spent in my courtroom was costing him $5,000, and that I should, in his words, factor that into my decision. That happened on the morning of May 19th, 2025, at exactly 10:09 a.m., when Garrett Townsend, age 44, senior managing partner of Townsend Strategic Advisory, told me his hourly rate and asked me to speed things up. What I told him 60 seconds later made him go silent for the first time in what I suspect was his entire adult life. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what happened next is a lesson in the difference between what a man charges and what a man is worth. Let me take you back to how this whole thing started. The case file on my desk was flagged by my clerk Dorothy with both a red tab and a yellow tab, which in Dorothy's system means it is both urgent and personal, meaning the case had affected her in some way when she reviewed it. In 17 years, Dorothy has used a double tab 4 times. Case number 2025-CR-3729, reckless driving, leaving the scene of an injury accident, and failure to render aid. The defendant was Garrett Townsend, age 44, founder and senior managing partner of Townsend Strategic Advisory, a management consulting firm with offices in Providence, Boston, and New York. The firm's annual billings were approximately $38 million. Townsend's personal compensation was $4.2 million per year. His personal net worth was estimated at $22 million. He owned a home in the east side of Providence, assessed at $3.6 million, a ski lodge in Killington, Vermont, and an apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. He drove a $142,000 Porsche Panamera Turbo in gentian blue metallic, with vanity plates reading TSA 1. The complainant was a woman named Helen Kowalczyk, age 58, 4th grade teacher at VZ Street Elementary School in Providence. I need you to understand who Helen Kowalczyk is, because this is a story about what a person is worth, and the answer has nothing to do with an hourly rate. Helen Kowalczyk was born in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, the daughter of a mill worker and a school cafeteria aide. Her father, Stanley, came home every night with textile dust on his clothes and read to Helen from library books at the kitchen table, because he believed reading was the door to every room. Her mother, Joan, packed lunches for 400 children a day and never forgot which ones had allergies. Helen decided she wanted to be a teacher in the 3rd grade when a woman named Mrs. Tavares told her she was good with words, and that good with words meant she could change the world one classroom at a time. Helen earned her teaching degree from Rhode Island College, working summers at a daycare center and weekends at a grocery store. She was hired at VZ Street Elementary at age 24. She had been there for 34 years. 34 years of teaching 4th graders to read, to write, to add fractions, and to believe they mattered. She made $68,000 a year, the salary of a veteran public school teacher with a master's degree and 3 decades of service. She had never left VZ Street because the children there needed her, and she was not the kind of person who left. Helen's husband, Paul, had been a city bus driver for 28 years. He made $24.50 an hour. He drove the Route 27 bus, the one that went through the neighborhoods where Helen's students lived, and he knew half of them by name because they rode his bus to school. Paul had a bad hip from years of sitting in a driver's seat, and the surgery he needed cost $14,000 after insurance, money they did not have yet. They had $3,800 in savings. They lived in a small Cape Cod house in North Providence that they had bought in 2001 for $158,000 and were still paying the mortgage on. Helen drove a 2014 Subaru Outback with 156,000 miles and a bumper sticker that read, "My students are my superpower." On the morning of February 12, 2025, at approximately 7:18 a.m., Helen Kowalczyk was walking from her parked car to the front entrance of VZ Street Elementary. She was carrying a tote bag full of graded papers, a box of Valentine's Day cards she had bought for her students with her own money, and a coffee thermos. It was a Wednesday. She was wearing her winter coat and a scarf her students had knitted for her as a class project the previous year. Garrett Townsend was driving his Porsche Panamera southbound on Vesey Street at 7:18 a.m. School zone speed limit, 20 miles per hour. Townsend was traveling at approximately 41 miles per hour. He was looking at his phone. The intersection camera, installed by the city 3 months earlier, captured the entire incident. Townsend's Porsche struck Helen as she crossed the street in the marked crosswalk. She was thrown 14 feet. The tote bag ripped open. Graded papers scattered across the road. The box of Valentine's cards broke apart, and the cards blew across the intersection. Helen landed on the pavement on her left side. She fractured her left hip, her left wrist, and 2 ribs. She sustained a concussion. She was conscious but could not move. Townsend's Porsche stopped 40 feet past the impact point. The intersection camera showed Townsend look in his rearview mirror, look at his phone, and then drive away. He did not stop. He did not call 911. He did not get out of his car. A crossing guard named Luis Montoya, who was posted at the corner, ran to Helen and called for help. He took off his own jacket and put it under her head. An ambulance arrived in 7 minutes. Helen was taken to Rhode Island Hospital, where she spent 4 days. The hip fracture required surgery. The wrist required a cast. The concussion required 3 weeks of rest. She was out of her classroom for 11 weeks. Let me say that again. This man was driving 41 miles per hour in a 20 mile per hour school zone while looking at his phone at 7:18 in the morning when children were arriving. He struck a 4th grade teacher in a crosswalk. He watched her lying on the pavement in his rearview mirror, and he drove away. He drove away from a woman surrounded by Valentine's Day cards her students would never receive. If you have ever had a teacher who changed your life, who stayed after school, who believed in you when nobody else did, then please subscribe to this channel. We are a family here, and we fight for the people who build the future, one child at a time. Join us now. Townsend was identified within 3 hours through the intersection camera footage and his vanity plates. Officer Angela Ferreira, badge number 6284, arrived at his office on Westminster Street at 10:30 a.m. According to her report, when she informed Townsend that he had struck a pedestrian and left the scene, his first response was not to ask about Helen's condition. His first response was, "I have a client meeting in 20 minutes. Can we schedule this for another time?" Drop a comment right now and tell me what you think should happen to a man who hits a teacher and asks to reschedule the consequences. And if you believe that no hourly rate excuses leaving a human being on the pavement, hit that like button, because what happened in my courtroom makes me proud to wear this robe. When Garrett Townsend walked into court on May 19th, he looked like a man who had mistakenly wandered into a building he would normally never enter. He was wearing a custom Ermenegildo Zegna suit, charcoal with a faint window pane, approximately $5,200. His shirt was crisp white, spread collar, custom monogrammed. His tie was Hermes, the unmistakable chain link pattern, $420. On his wrist was a Jaeger LeCoultre Reverso in rose gold, $14,800. His shoes were Edward Green, bench-made in England, $1,900. He had a defense attorney from a white shoe firm in Providence billing at $800 an hour. They sat at the defense table, and Townsend immediately opened a leather portfolio and began reviewing documents as if the courtroom were a conference room and the hearing were an agenda item. Helen Kowalczyk sat in the gallery. She was walking with a cane. Her left wrist was still in a brace 11 weeks after the accident. She was wearing a simple blue cardigan and dark pants. Her hair was pulled back. Beside her sat Paul, in a clean polo shirt, his bus driver's ID badge still clipped to his belt because he had come straight from his shift. Behind them sat something that made my heart swell. 23 of Helen's current and former students had come with their parents, 4th graders, 10-year-olds in school clothes, sitting in a courtroom on a Monday morning because their teacher had been hurt and they wanted to be there. One of them, a girl named Alejandra, was holding a handmade card that read, "Get well, Mrs. K," in purple marker. They sat in 2 rows, silent and serious, the way 10-year-olds sit when they understand that something important is happening, even if they do not fully understand what. The evidence was devastating. The intersection camera footage was played. You could see Helen in the crosswalk. You could see the Porsche approaching at speed. You could see the impact. You could see the papers and Valentine cards scattering. You could see Townsend's brake lights, the pause, and then the Porsche accelerating away. Several parents in the gallery covered their children's eyes. Paul gripped the armrest of the bench. Helen sat perfectly still, watching herself get hit on a screen, her hand on her cane. Townsend's attorney presented the defense. Sun glare, momentary distraction, deep remorse, willingness to cover medical expenses. The phone records, subpoenaed by the prosecution, showed that Townsend had been reading an email from a client at 7:17 a.m., 1 minute before the impact. The email was about a quarterly revenue projection. The subject line was, Q1 numbers, need your eyes. He had been reading about revenue when he struck a teacher. Then Garrett Townsend made his move. He waved his attorney aside, stood, buttoned his Xenia jacket with a practiced gesture, and addressed me. He told me the accident was regrettable. He said he had panicked. He said leaving the scene was a mistake he deeply regretted. Then he looked at his Jaeger LeCoultre, an unconscious gesture that told me everything, and said, Judge, I want to resolve this today. My time is billed at $5,000 an hour. Every hour I spend in this courtroom is an hour I am not serving my clients. I have offered to cover the medical expenses in full. I would respectfully ask the court to consider the practical cost of keeping me here and move toward a resolution. The courtroom went dead silent, not the kind of silence that follows a gasp, the kind that settles over a room when every person in it is holding the same thought, and nobody can believe it was said out loud. 23 10-year-olds stared at the man who had hit their teacher and just told a judge his time was too expensive for justice. Helen's hand tightened on her cane. Paul closed his eyes. I felt my jaw tighten. I sat absolutely still. My father, God rest his soul, an Italian immigrant who drove a taxi and opened a small grocery store on Federal Hill, used to tell me, watch out for the man who thinks he is better than everybody else. That man is dangerous. Looking at Garrett Townsend checking his $14,800 watch in a room full of fourth graders, I knew my father had been talking about this exact moment. Now here is where the story turns. Subscribe if you have not already. My clerk Dorothy handed me a folder. The Rhode Island Attorney General's office, working in coordination with the state comptroller, had been investigating Townsend's strategic advisory for 5 months. A former senior associate named James Dorsey had filed a whistleblower complaint alleging that the firm had been systematically overbilling a state government consulting contract. The contract, worth $6.4 million over 3 years, was for strategic advisory services to the Rhode Island Department of Administration. Dorsey's complaint, supported by internal billing records he had preserved, showed that the firm had billed 4,300 hours of work that was never performed. At Townsend's personal rate of $5,000 an hour, his own phantom billings on the contract totaled $2.8 million. The state AG had referred the matter to the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. Federal investigators were building a case. The arrogance evaporated from Garrett Townsend's face. His attorney grabbed the folder. Townsend's hand went to his tie. He pulled at the Hermes knot like it was tightening around his throat. His leather portfolio sat open on the table, the documents inside suddenly irrelevant. If you have stuck with me this long, you are incredible. Hit subscribe. What comes next is the 60 seconds that taught Garrett Townsend the true cost of his time. I set the folder down. I did not pause. I did not build up. I did the math. Mr. Townsend, you told me your time is worth $5,000 an hour. Let us use your number. Helen Kowalczyk has been out of her classroom for 11 weeks. That is 55 school days. At 7 hours per day, that is 385 hours of teaching that her students lost. At your rate, $5,000 an hour, that is $1,925,000 worth of her time that you stole from those children when you were reading an email about quarterly revenue and driving 41 miles per hour in a school zone. I let that number sit. Then I continued. But here is the difference between you and Helen Kowalczyk, Mr. Townsend. She does not charge $5,000 an hour. She makes $68,000 a year. She earns approximately $35 an hour. And every one of those hours is worth more than yours. Because at the end of her hour, a child can read a sentence they could not read before. At the end of your hour, a spreadsheet has a new number on it. Those are not the same thing. The courtroom was completely still. Alejandra, the girl with the purple marker card, was staring at me with her mouth open. Several parents were crying. Helen had her hand over her mouth. Paul had his arm around her. I am fining you $50,000. Every dollar will go directly to Helen Kowalczyk to cover her medical expenses, her rehabilitation, Paul's hip surgery, which they have been unable to afford, and the out-of-pocket costs she has incurred buying supplies for her classroom with her own money for 34 years. His attorney stood. I was not finished. You will perform 750 hours of community service. You will serve those hours as a volunteer classroom aide at Vesey Street Elementary School and at after-school tutoring programs in Providence. You will sit with fourth graders. You will help them with their reading. You will sharpen their pencils. You will hand out their papers. You will learn what $35 an hour looks like when it changes a child's life. Furthermore, your driver's license is suspended for 3 years. I am referring this case to the Attorney General for felony hit-and-run prosecution, and I am entering the billing fraud findings into the record for federal consideration. Mr. Townsend, you asked me to factor in the cost of your time. I have. Here is what your time cost: a teacher's hip, a teacher's wrist, 2 broken ribs, a concussion, 11 weeks out of a classroom, 23 children without their favorite teacher, and a box of Valentine's Day cards that never got delivered. That is the true cost of your time, and no hourly rate in the world will ever pay it back. The courtroom erupted. 23 fourth graders were on their feet. Alejandra ran to Helen and handed her the card. Helen took it, looked at it, and started crying. Paul was holding her. Parents were standing and clapping. Luis Montoya, the crossing guard who had cradled Helen's head on the pavement, was in the back row in his reflective vest, wiping his eyes. Townsend stood at the defense table, the Zegna suit hanging on a man who suddenly looked smaller inside it, the Jaeger LeCoultre still ticking on a wrist he would not look at, the leather portfolio closed. He did not speak. There was no hourly rate for what he was feeling. Smash that like button if you believe that a teacher's hour is worth more than a consultant's invoice. This story has one final chapter. 6 months later, Garrett Townsend pleaded guilty to felony hit-and-run causing serious bodily injury. He was sentenced to 14 months in state prison and 3 years of probation. His driver's license was revoked for 5 years. The FBI's investigation into the billing fraud resulted in a federal indictment on 12 counts of wire fraud. Townsend pleaded guilty to 7. He was sentenced to an additional 30 months in federal prison to be served consecutively. Townsend's strategic advisory was dissolved. The state recovered $4.1 million in overbilled fees. Helen Kowalczyk returned to her classroom in April. The morning she walked through the door of room 12 at Vesey Street Elementary, every student stood. They had made a banner that stretched across the chalkboard. It read, in 23 different handwritings, "Welcome back, Mrs. K." Alejandra had drawn a heart in purple marker in the corner. Helen's hip healed. Her wrist healed. Paul got his surgery that summer, paid for by the fine. He was back driving Route 27 by September. Helen told me she still walks with a slight limp some mornings, but she said it reminds her to slow down, which she said is not the worst lesson for a teacher. Luis Montoya, the crossing guard, was given a commendation by the city for his actions that morning. He still works the corner at Vesey Street. Helen brings him coffee every morning. She has not missed a day since she came back. I think about that case when I drive past a school zone. I slow down. I put my phone in the glove box. And I think about Helen Kowalczyk in a crosswalk at 7:18 in the morning, carrying graded papers and Valentine's Day cards, heading to a classroom full of children who were waiting for her. And I think about a man in a $142,000 car reading an email about quarterly revenue. 2 people, 2 hourly rates. Only one of them was doing something that mattered. My father used to tell me, Watch out for the man who thinks he is better than everybody else. That man is dangerous. Garrett Townsend thought his $5,000 an hour made him more important than a school zone speed limit. It made him more important than a crosswalk. It made him more important than a teacher. He was wrong about all three, and 23 fourth graders watched him learn it. To anyone watching who is a teacher, a school aide, a counselor, a crossing guard, anyone who works in a school and wonders if it matters, it matters. It matters more than any consulting fee ever billed. Your hour is the most valuable hour in America. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. To anyone who has been hurt by someone who drove away, who left you on the pavement and chose their schedule over your life, you deserve better. And if you speak up, the system will stand with you. I have seen it. I promise you. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you believe in real justice, do 3 things for me. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a story like this. Leave a comment and tell me about a teacher who changed your life. Someone who deserves to hear thank you, even if it has been 20 years. And watch the next video, where a hospital administrator pulls the plug on a veteran's treatment to free a bed for a VIP patient, and what the nurse does next gets her fired, and then gets her a standing ovation in this courtroom. That one will shake you to your core. Thank you for being here. Justice is not measured in dollars per hour. It is measured in what you do when nobody is watching. And everybody was watching Garrett Townsend. He just did not care.